The project started with
curiosity. Who are we and where are we?
Coming to the realization that there are so many people like us who have come from different places to Canada and then see the world, I suppose, through a different cultural lens and who have this perspective from somewhere else. We first got together, Jay, Sasha and myself, in our office about a year and a half ago now to talk about what we should submit to the Canada Council for the project to be able to go to the Biennale.
And that same night then, many glasses of wine later, we realized that while our experiences were quite different from one another, they all had this common thread. They were stories about us unsettling from places that we used to call home, and then the journey of resettling into the new and the unfamiliar.
So we worked on the landscape for months, trying to figure out some sort of a modular structure that would be flexible and yet fixed enough so it could be logistically possible to be rebuilt 8, 9, 10 times. In Canada, you're not asked to assimilate into a culture, but instead you get to express who you are and where you come from. So too the exhibition structure needed to be affected by the entrance. We thought that in this new abstract landscape, everyone, even First Nation Canadians, would be immigrants dealing with the issue of settling and unsettling. This is what Canadian landscape is all about.
I come from Finland, which has a very homogeneous culture where everyone is 100% Finnish. It's also a place where the portrait on a 50-mark bill used to be not the president, but an architect, Alvar Aalto. It's a small detail, but I think it describes the larger value that Finns place on design and what helps to build a strong culture for architecture in the country. At the same time, this sort of nostalgia about culture has led to the protection of an established identity and rejection of new and different ideas. After having lived in Canada for years and visiting my family back in Finland, I saw the Finnish culture through the Canadian eyes and how jarring the attitudes towards differences really were. The things that my own family would say now embarrass me. And at the same time, I know this does not come from out of intention to hurt, but from a lack of exposure to diversity. Diversity really is a richness in culture and society and in architecture, and embracing and truly understanding diversity really allows you to be open to new ideas. I know now that you can't really learn it. You can't learn diversity, you have to live it.
You are intrigued. You're intrigued, and it's actually very interesting because when we shared different stories, but one of the stories that I shared was I was very shocked when I asked, when I went to a social or party setting, when I was asked, this is like a pattern in Canada, I think, where are you from? And then the next question is, okay, where your mother's from, and where are your father's from? And they start talking about, again, and my shocking experience, what do you want to know? Why do you want to know about my father or my mother? And they always talk about, my mother's from, my German background comes from my mother's side, my Polish background comes from my father's side, my English background comes from my mother's side, those sort of things. They sort of really talk about the genealogy as an introduction or icebreaker in a setting like a social gathering. And I never had that experience in Korea. I never had that sort of kind of question, because you don't question your bloodline in a monoculture, especially in a monoculture, right? When you're asked about your family, you think, that guy's trying to investigate my bloodline and trying to sort of sabotage my sort of true being or something. You know, it's sort of different thing, right?
So this is one of my favorite stories. I was in a cab coming back from another fundraising trip in Calgary and given an interview about migrating landscapes to a local radio show by phone. After I hung up, the cabbie, without me prompting him or asking him anything, was sort of inspired to tell his own story. His former life as a stockbroker in India, moving to Montreal, learning French, being cold, moving to Toronto, and then back to Calgary. And we talked the whole way to the airport, just complete strangers. In the end, what he concluded, though, is that he said the difference between Canada and India is that in Canada we value life. And I thought, oh, This is so moving. I was so excited at the same time and thought to myself that the difference really between Finland and Canada then is that this moment could really only happen in Canada.
So we just finished the first 3 shows and we're about to open 4th and 5th in Montreal and Saskatoon. And on the eve of the opening in Montreal, the general theme for the Biennale was announced by David Chipperfield, The Common Ground. Actually, we were ecstatic about this. We called the office, we texted our partners, there were loud cheers all around as we figured out that the Migrating Landscapes is very much about what Common Ground was talking about. We started collaborations among architects in this country, anywhere from students to schools, to young architects, to established architects, to sponsors. Everybody came together to discuss the issue of migration through architecture. We felt Migrating Landscapes fell into the story of the Common Ground extremely well. So we were invited to present or be a part of the 13th XIII Architecture Conferences in Mexico City, and Johanna and I went, and right off the bat we were starstruck with Zaha Hadid and Thomas Hedderwick and Benedetta Talibui. After the presentations, we got to hang out with some of the architects, one of them being Benedetta Talibui, and we were rather mesmerized by sort of the breadth of the projects and the locations of the projects that they were involved in. So as we were in the midst of organizing Migrating Landscapes, we've asked questions about how do they approach working in different contexts and contexts that they're not familiar with, and so on. And what she said that you cannot understand the context, you cannot penetrate it entirely. You try to get as much as you can out of being there, and but you should not pretend that you understand it. You bring your own experiences, you bring your own work, and you do the best you can.
So one of the best moments in our almost a 1.5 year long process was the opening night of the national exhibition at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. We had the 18 winning teams, the final Team Canada, announced. We had a full house with about 400 people in attendance, and some of the teams had traveled from far corners of the country just to be present, even without knowing whether they would get their ticket to Venice. There were moms, there were dads, there were kids and grandmas in attendance, just waiting to hear the announcement. And it was really, really thrilling for us. And I was so happy to see that how we were able to give this opportunity to others, and how the project brought ideas and architects, their families, and the general public together, caring about architecture and creating our country's best possible representation in Venice.
31 weeks of architecture exhibitions in 7 Canadian cities, that's more than half a year. 8 venues, over 250 sponsors and supporters, 300 individuals and 120 entries submitted to the competition, 37 highly regarded jurors, I can't believe we got them all to participate, hundreds of volunteers and thousands of volunteer hours, over 7,500 cubic feet of wood, over 100 publications and media pieces in newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and on the web. Migrating Landscapes is changing the landscape of architecture culture in Canada, when this is only one stop along the way.
So we have concluded that perhaps in the production of architecture, there's a real value in knowing ourselves and what we are about before we can truly engage in the larger architectural conversation. The competition results reflect something new and raw. It's not the glossy images that we see in the pages of architectural magazines, but instead something that's highly personal, that matters to us, and is just under the surface in all of us as designers. It also, I think, suggests a new dialect in architecture that is emerging, one with the potential to move Canadian architecture away from polite responses towards something bold and gutsy.
How does one inhabit a place that they call home? It really is the first act of settlement into a new surrounding.
They tell these anecdotes of settling, and that actually is an amazing way to construct your kind of environment around you, understand your environment around you. And I think that's a very interesting way to access the understanding of architecture. I think that's what the project is about.